So today we're going to go over the Gottman couples method. So welcome. And so Gottman's couples approach is a really popular one. Gottman and his wife, John Gottman and his wife Julie have actually have a lot of popular books out for the general audience. And they also do have, of course, a method for psychotherapists and couples therapists. So it's a very popular approach, and I think there's a lot for everyone, whether you work primarily with individuals, but certainly if you work with couples or families, to just Gottman Method has a lot of research, and there's a lot there that, even if it's not your main approach, you don't use all of his protocols and worksheets or whatever, there's a lot here for all of us to know. And just as mental health professionals, even if you work primarily with individuals, I think a lot of the Gottman research is important to know. And so so John Gottman's kind of interesting because he actually started his work. He's primarily a researcher, not a clinician. And his research was around couples. And so he spent about 25 years or more early in his career. And what he studied was the difference between couples who stayed together and those who didn't, who divorced. And he primarily looked at married couples. And kind of the measuring stick he used was, couples who stay together for 25 years or more. And then he looked at predicting who would divorce and who would not. And so his research is talked about a lot because it's really was groundbreaking in that, as we're going to talk about today, he was able to, predict um, whether or not a couple would stay together or divorce, I think within a 5-year period, based watching just a small snippet of the two of them arguing. And he could do so by the end of this 25 years of studying couples with 97.5% accuracy. And, when his research came out, I'd probably been practicing for 10 years. And I remember I found that chilling because, at that point in my career, I think as a field in general, we kind of had a sense that like there was a free will choice and whether or not your marriage worked, staying in, staying out. And the fact that this man came up with research that could accurately predict whether or not a marriage stayed together or not with 97.5% accuracy was just jaw-dropping. For those of us who were in the field way back then, that was like, I mean, you had to reread that, line several times in the research article. I'm like, no. So it's really changed the way I look at couples. I do a lot of couples work in my practice and how I think about it. And so I think this research is really important. There is just so much bad information, misinformation, especially in the age of social media. But even before social media, when you go to your typical parent or friend for couples advice, most of them give terrible advice. And I often will tell some of my individual clients, okay, let's talk about who you're talking to about your relationship and getting feedback from, because that's also a problem in terms of there's just so many erroneous ideas out there. And so that's why I appreciate John Gottman's contribution to the field. So, with all of that said, let's go ahead and get started. So, first off, for those of you who are graduate students and need a letter of attendance, you will be getting that at the end of the hour. I'll put a link in the chat. These letters of attendance are often recognized by universities to give graduate students credit for their professional training outside of their university hours. But typically, most licensing boards do not recognize these as continuing education hours. And so that's how that works. So, in a nutshell, so John Gottman's work, the Gottman Method is what he calls it, was developed by Gottman, and the book was published in 1999 based on his observational and longitudinal research of over 3,000 couples since the 80s. And so it is not correct to call the Gottman Method an evidence-based treatment because it wasn't evidence-based. It's evidence-informed, and evidence-informed means he conducted research. Based on that research, he kind of extrapolated what therapists need to focus on and built a therapeutic interventions based on that. So it's research informed, but it is not evidence. It's not an evidence-based treatment where evidence-based treatments like emotionally focused couples therapy or integrated behavioral couples therapy. Those are therapeutic methods that were researched extensively, refined, researched again, and they have been kind of they grew up through the research and actually researching the therapeutic interventions where evidence informed is using research to inform your interventions. I have a whole lecture on that somewhere on my YouTube channel, but I just want to make that really clear. It's not an EBT, it's not an evidence-based treatment per se. And so the whole method is based on distinguishing what do couples that stay together do differently than couples who don't stay together, and teaching couples who want to stay together how to develop the interaction patterns and behaviors and attitudes of those couples who are successful in terms of staying together long term. So it's scientifically based, it is research informed, evidence informed, but it's not an evidence-based treatment, and it's really based on what predicts marital stability. And there's a lot of kind of coaching couples in effective patterns, in effective kind of communication patterns that were correlated with couples who stayed together. And so there is a revised version of this. So there is the Gottman Method from 1999. And then in 2011, he updated his approach with what's called the revised sound marital house theory, which expands the approach to integrate more what he calls trust. I read into that. There's a lot more focus on a secure attachment, which is really the focus of Sue Johnson's work. And so he did kind of update this because once he got the model out there and he started doing research on outcomes, he had to update it, which is interestingly very similar to what happened several decades earlier in integrated behavioral couples therapy, where Neil Jacobson and Andrew Christensen came up with the behavioral couples therapy model. It had really good outcomes, but the outcomes didn't last for more than 6 months. And after 6 months, they had to couples kind of went back to baseline. So they did achieve change quickly, but it didn't last. And so Christensen and Jacobson uh, re-edited their behavioral approach to be integrative behavioral couples therapy, and they got kind of integrated a lot more of the affective and emotional components to it, as well as cognitive components. And they have more robust long-term findings. And actually, Gottman had to do something similar. And so, what I think both of those stories kind of tell us is when you're working with couples, this may seem obvious, but it certainly took researchers decades to prove this, that you can work on the behaviors, but there's really some important emotional components, affective components around secure attachment, to use the language of Sue Johnson that many people are familiar with. But I think that's kind of the gist of why that level, it's a little bit deeper, needs to be addressed and usually repaired typically in order to have long-term gains with couples. So Gottman likes to debunk some of the marital myths. So let's get started. The first is that communication training helps. Ironically, we just saw on a slide, he does do teaching effective communication. So things like teaching couples to use I statements or to use non-blaming statements is just not sufficient. It's not meaningless. It's not, don't do it. But if you're thinking you're just going to teach this very kind of surface level, use I statements, don't use blaming statements, if you think that's going to fix a marriage, it's not. Um, and I think one of the statistics I cite most frequently with my couples, and well, with individuals, with all my clients, with families, with all my clients, this is one of my favorite statistics that came out of John Gottman's research. And this is really jaw-dropping, stunning research. And what he found was that couples who stay together, I hope you're sitting down and listening to this, okay? I want you to really listen, tune in. If you've been like your mind attention's been drifting, I want you to listen to this because this is hard to believe. Successful couples maintain a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative comments during conflict. So during a conflict, 5 positives for every negative. Then, during the regular times, there are 20 positives to every a negative interaction. So these can be compliments, these can be laughing at a joke together, watching a show together, holding hands, but you need 20 of those for every negative interaction in order for a relationship to feel safe and secure. So what that tells me, and kind of my translation is like 95% of the interactions in a relationship pretty much have to have a neutral to positive tone to it in order for the people to feel like they have secure attachment. So this has huge implications for couples and for families in terms of, I have couples who will come in and say, shouldn't I just be telling my partner everything I think and feel? I'm like, no, for the love of God. No, if you want to stay together, you don't tell your partner everything you think and feel, and certainly unfiltered. Why should I have to filter myself? I'm like, you need to have 20 positives for every negative. I remember very early in my career, I was in San Antonio, Texas, in my graduate program. We had a community clinic, and I remember this couple came in. They were very young. I mean, they were late teens, early 20s, very, very young. I remember they had to drive. They were lived in a very rural community, and they were coming in for couples therapy. And I remember, they were fighting, and I remember sharing this with this young man, to I don't know, 18, 19, 20, maybe 21 tops, right? And sharing that, there you need this ratio for there to be a sense of emotional safety. And he just looked at me. He goes, "Oh my God, I thought if I just brought her flowers after a fight, we were done." And I'm like, "No, you need to bring her flowers for 20 days." Now, obviously, I'm joking, and that's an, exaggeration. But I just remember his jaw like hit the floor because he thought for every snarky comment you could have a sweet say you're sorry and that you're done. I'm like, no, there's like 19 more, repairing, to build that sense of safety. And so, but you can see he was literally doing this calculation in his head. We had a fight. I brought her flowers. We're done. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's much longer than that. And oftentimes, I watch some of my own clients in session, and they will often say things that are so unnecessarily harsh, and the repair it's going to take to fix some of those, and the time it's going to take to fix some of those, I think our clients don't always understand or totally underestimate. And I think many people have the assumption of that young client who was in my office years ago, where, well, I said something mean, I'm sorry, so aren't we equal? I'm like, you've taken the first of 20 minimum steps, to recovery, but there's a long road to go there to create that. And so I think when that statistic really sinks in, we all take better care of our relationships. Even as a parent, this is so important. You can only parent around, the events where you can keep this 95% ratio going. So even as a parent, you have to hit this ratio, which is hard. Okay? Because boy, I could I could certainly do 95% corrective comments and 5% positive with my kids, Totally possible. But if you did that, you're going, and that's what happens with a lot of teenagers, right? When parents go and put their kids on a week-long, timeout as a teenager, and they keep this ice cold relationship with the kids, they're cold and standoffish. And so part of the punishment isn't only that they're not going to get to go see their friends, it's also that, there's going to be this, let's say they're grounded for a week of cold and distance from their parents. That is you've just trashed your 95% and ratio, your 20-to-1 ratio, because you can still, if the consequence is not seeing their friends, there still should be positive, warm, securely attached interactions with their parents. It should not be a Cold War for a week. So this is something that's very, very common. It's kind of hard for a lot of parents to like understand. It's like, no, the punishment's not seeing their friends. So yeah, they can stay home and watch a movie and eat popcorn with you. Absolutely. In fact, I highly recommend it. So, and with couples, just understanding that the, little hug, and kiss when you walk in the door or on the way out to work, or the cute little, the little text saying, I'm thinking of you, love you, during the day, all of those really do matter. They are not little, they are super important. And oftentimes with my couples, one of the first things I do is I have them hit this ratio. Just start start adding positives into your daily, get that ratio back up. Because what happens is once you get that ratio back up, it becomes, it's easier to build trust. So this is one of the things I use a lot in my work, even though I don't strictly use a very, a protocol specific Gottman method. I use a lot of Gottman's research, and this is one of the ones I use with a lot of my clients. So, another thing that Gottman's methods find is that defensiveness, criticism, and stonewalling, we'll talk about the four horsemen in just a minute in more detail, they occur actually in all couples. So, all couples have a certain amount of defensiveness, criticism, and stonewalling. But the specific horseman of contempt is much more of a predictor of divorce. And it's really the frequency at which you have defensiveness, criticism, and stonewalling. It's really the frequency that is the issue. Let's keep going. We got more myths to bust here. Myth number two, anger is dangerous. I don't quite like the way he phrases this, but we're gonna talk through this real quick here. So, and what his research means is that the expression of anger alone does not predict divorce. So just being angry is not the problem. It's the contempt and defensiveness that go along with it are really the key indicators. And so anger is linked to short-term dissatisfaction in the relationship, but there can be long-term relationship improvement. So expressing anger in a healthy, appropriate way, right? This is not rage, not raging at your partner and calling them names and insulting them and showing contempt, but this is expressing frustration and anger in a healthy way can be important, especially in early phases of the relationship and in general in heterosexual relationships. Sometimes, if you have a very people-pleasing female, or if you have a people-pleasing male, I have those too, those couples too. Is one of the people pleaser in the couple. If they don't express some dissatisfaction or anger early on, that's also not a good sign. So sometimes anger is definitely needed. Um, to be expressed in healthy ways so that you could really create a relationship that's satisfying to both people. And if one person is just doing all the people pleasing from the beginning, that often doesn't lead to good long-term outcomes for couples. So, um, third myth is the quid pro quo error. And so those of you who are studying for licensure or have studied cognitive behavioral theory, you'll know the quid pro quo, I don't know why it's hard for me to say today, is if I do this, you'll do this. It's kind of like it's tit for tat, but in a kind of like, if I, whatever, cook the dinner, you do the dishes. So to a certain extent, that's not terrible. But if that is really your primary way of organizing a relationship, there's going to be this, if I do this, you do this. There's this like contractual bargaining that using that as the primary organizing feature of your relationship is a problem. So it really does characterize unhappy marriages. So if I did this, so why don't you have to do that now, right? That sort of thing. And so contingency contracting is ineffective in terms of improving marital satisfaction. Although we do use contingency contracting with children, it's not a marital technique, couples therapy technique. And so healthy relationships really move beyond this transactional exchange. That said, there are certainly times where every couple needs to, do some negotiating around either how they're going to spend money or how they're going to do travel or what they're going to do with the kids or who's going to handle, certain chores or childcare. There's a certain amount of discussing that, but that should not be the primary way of approaching the relationship as an exchange. Some kind of let's make a fair exchange here. That is not a sign of a healthy relationship. So let's take a look at the big picture. So looking at treatment. So they do a very detailed assessment in terms of using a lot of written and oral standardized assessments. So these are assessments, though, that have been developed by Gottman based on his research, and then they target specific areas based on the assessment outcomes. There is a lot of psychoeducation and structured exercises. So, so educating couples about effective and ineffective, relationship practices and using videotape conversations, analyzing them, giving feedback. So there's a lot of very structured educational way of working with couples. His beliefs about effective couples therapy include that the couple therapy experience should be a positive affect experience. So that coming to couples therapy should be enjoyable and we should avoid, it shouldn't be a place where you're afraid of being criticized or blamed in session, either by your partner or the therapist. Um, and that couples therapy should be primarily didactic, that couples should interact with each other rather than through the therapist moderating it all. So having the couple, turn towards each other and talk through things, and probably less intervention than you might see with a typical enactment in structural therapy or EFT. And that he thinks of it as emotional learning, that you want to, that learning and change really happen when couples actively experience difficult emotions within therapy and practice managing them. So, avoiding criticism and blame, but there is a certain amount of discomfort, I think, in couples therapy for most people. Just in term, but you want to keep it in a very safe, kind of upbeat, hopeful, process and way to kind of contain some of working through those difficult emotions. So his principles for therapeutic intervention is that they should be easy and non-threatening. They should feel achievable and unintimidating. They should be realistic and not idealistic. So focusing on attainable outcomes, reducing conflict rather than a marital, perfection or idealized happiness. So some couples, never want their partner to ever say a harsh word. Some couple, people will come in demanding that, the partner never do this again. This never happens. We don't want to argue again. And that's not realistic. There's going to be tensions, there's going to be disagreements. And so it's really kind of shifting the goal to how do we have manage our differences and difficulties in respectful, loving ways, um, is really more of the goal. And so I'll often, I mean, secretly, pretty much every couple comes in and they're kind of hoping that you, the therapist, you're going to, tell their client, their partner that their partner's wrong and crazy and that they're right. Sometimes it's explicit. I have some clients who like, don't you think it's, unrealistic to da 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 to me? I get that a lot. And even if they don't say it out loud, they're usually thinking it. And trust me, if you do couples therapy, you will be used as a weapon. Don't you remember Diane said you did blah, 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 blah. So you will be used and weaponized in couples arguments. And sometimes I preemptively talk about that as a couples therapist. So if you're used to letting your clients walk in, set the goal, and you blindly agree to those goals, that's not what Gottman is saying here. We need to make sure our clients just have realistic goals from the start as to what the outcome of couples therapy will look like. So let's talk about the therapeutic relationship. So Gottman really considers the therapist more like a coach. So it's very didactic, very educational, but you're coaching them more than processing emotions. You're empowering couples to really take ownership of their relationship, so that they feel like they know that they know how to manage this and they're not relying on you to negotiate their conflict. So, and so what the therapist also does, rather than being the one who kind of soothes couples in terms of managing the difficult emotions, they're coaching the couple to soothe each other. So let's say, partner A says something that really, upsets partner B's crying. The therapist is not going to go and comfort partner B. The therapist is going to coach partner A how to soothe and calm and, can reconnect with partner B. They're not going to do the work for them. So very much a coach, not getting in there. They aren't, directly processing a lot of emotions with the client. Okay, so let's look at the viewing or the case conceptualization in using the Gottman method. So one of the first things you can think of is looking at some of those factors that they found that predicts divorce with 97.5% accuracy to kind of get a sense of where the couple is. So, and these are known as the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And you probably have heard these, certainly is a buzzy term, and people remember it. So this is one of the other sound bites of psychoeducation I use quite a bit. First is criticism. So criticism is defined here. It's not just where someone feels criticized. It is a specific behavior in this approach. And that's what, it's global negative statements. And apparently women are more likely to have that, you're uncaring, you're lazy, you're this, you're that. So that's criticism, but it's a global negative statement about the person and or their worth rather than distinguishing that from very specific, like what you just did, I disapprove, I didn't like or whatever. So, but criticism is really about saying that is a global negative statement about the person. And that's not, that's different than having saying you didn't like a certain behavior, if that makes sense. So criticism in this approach is looking at global statements about the person and their worth, not their behavior. That's different. You criticize behavior. Um, so defensiveness is claiming you're innocent. This is defending yourself when your partner said, X, Y, you did X, Y, Z, and no, I didn't, or whatever it might be. So that defensiveness, when a partner brings a concern up, they're met with defensiveness. Contempt is a sense of just over unilateral superiority, and it is the strongest predictor of divorce. And that is a sense that you are unilaterally superior to your partner. Contempt is often identified by the eye roll. And if you do much couples therapy, when you see that eye roll, that is a really not a good sign. And that is something you definitely want to intervene on. It is one of the top predictors of divorce. Um, And then finally, we have stonewalling. And so stonewalling is when you either kind of emotionally, verbally, or physically put a wall up and shut the other person out. So you can do that by just being silent when your partner's talking to you and not, or, and it can be and just not really engaging, but you're not going back and forth. Um, you can stop talking. You might still say type of thing, but you're hardly giving, or you could say fine, whatever, but you're shutting the other person out. And sometimes it is physically removing themselves from the situation. And stonewalling is more common in men. Using criticism is more common in women. So women tend to, that's why the classic heterosexual interaction pattern, and you can get the same pattern you do get the same pattern in same-sex couples as well, but the classic heterosexual one is that the female is pursuing with criticism and the male is withdrawing. And they're pursuing connection is what they're pursuing. They're not pursuing for sex. They're pursuing for emotional connection or engagement. Men feel overwhelmed and they withdraw and you get the stonewalling. So that's where you get criticism. Criticism and stonewalling go with pursue withdraw pattern. So again, if you know my work, I'm into the unifying framework and all of these patterns just overlap, overlap, overlap. But the criticism and stonewalling overlap with pursue distance. It often overlaps with a lot of these patterns are correlated with your attachment style. And under enough pressure, all of us are either anxiously attached or avoidant attached. But the more anxious attached, you tend to criticize because you want to restore the connection as soon as it feels like it's lost. Avoidant attachment styles tend to do stonewalling and withdraw. So all of these patterns kind of overlap with couples. So other key factors to talk about. So obviously, Gottman would say that if you've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse, when you see these four things going on when a couple's arguing, this this is a harbinger that this relationship may not survive. And then that's where we come up with that there need to be five positives for each one of these negative behaviors in couples that actually stay together. They have a lot more positive woven in. If you're doing 50-50 or it's all negative with each other, which I have some of my couples, those couples, are going to need a lot of intervention just to be able to make the relationship work. So we got the 5-to-1 ratio during conflict. We discussed that. So in stable couples, there's five positives for every negative during conflict. For unstable couples, there's one negative to one positive in conflict. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So that 1-to-1 ratio is not a good thing. Okay, there's something that's called negative affect reciprocity. I know it's a lot to say. And that's where when one person is negative, that in most cases, the other person's response is going to be negative as well. So when one person's negativity is subsequently responded to with negativity in the other, and they kind of it does, so then it doesn't take much to get them started. It's not like someone says something and the other partner who might be calm at the time doesn't say, "Hey, is everything okay?" It doesn't check in. Instead of they come back with a snarky comment. And of course, both people feel like the other person started it. That's always how it works. Well, you said this first, and it's true. One person, each person heard something that triggered them to be negative, and from their each unique reality, it makes sense. But what this pattern of your partner's negative, so you immediately think you get to be negative, that is not good. Another one which is a good one to keep an eye on, and when you're assessing couples, if you're doing couples work or working with an individual, is repair attempts. So successful couples respond well to attempts to repair. So repair is like the olive branch. It's like, I'm sorry if that came out wrong. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but let's sit down and try to talk this through. But this is, the repair attempts are, it can be an apology, or it could be, maybe I misunderstood this. Can you go over it again? But they're trying to fix things, right? So someone puts out an olive branch. Let's say there's been this back and forth negativity, and then, one of them will give the olive branch. And that is important. And I coach my couples like if an olive branch is given, it's important to not reject it because distressed couples reject these attempts um and it really increases the chance of divorce. And so if you've got the four horsemen going and you have this failed repair attempts where offers an olive branch, the other person swats it away. I'm not ready to say I'm sorry, and I'm too upset right now to talk with you, and I'm too upset, right? There's no even attempt and the other person's being soft. Again, you are looking at very high risk for divorce. But wait, there are more cool stats and predictors of divorce. This is one of my favorites, accepting influence. So, in heterosexual marriages where men reject their wives' influence, they have an 80% increase of divorce. So, what that means is when a woman wants to influence her husband in terms of, what they're doing for the weekend, or they're going on vacation, or how they're spending money, or making any major decision, big or small, if the woman isn't able to influence, she shouldn't be having 100% say, right? But there should be this, he takes into consideration her opinions, her perspectives, her thoughts, and respects them, reflects on them, and uses that to make decisions. When that's not happening, those relationships with that one factor alone is a much higher risk of divorce. Interestingly, the reverse is not true in where if a woman he didn't find that women who don't accept influence, and I don't know if there weren't a lot of women who weren't accepting influence or not, but generally women do accept influence because they are socialized to do so. They're much more, it's kind of, taking in others' opinions is much more part of how women are socialized. So, um, so yeah, so this is a really fascinating thing, and this is again something that's very easy to observe as a clinician working with couples when you watch whether or not he is able to take influence from her. And I don't know if there's research, I've not seen research on same-sex couples, but I think in any case, even in same-sex couples, if one person doesn't take influence from the other, that's going to be a harder relationship to keep together. But I've not seen specific research around same-sex relationships. This is one I do a lot of work with couples, and it is harsh startup. And that is a negative interaction in the first minute strongly predicts divorce. So this is when a partner feels upset with they're upset with something their partner did, and rather than saying, "Hey, honey, the other day when you said X, that hurt my feelings," or "What were you thinking?" And that's kind of a softer startup. Startup was like, "I can't believe you just da 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 da." So when someone comes in with harsh startup, I mean, you definitely want to flag that. There's, and to work with couples to stop the harsh startup. It is so destructive in a relationship because the truth is you don't even know you haven't even gotten your clients your partner's perspective on the situation. Trying to think of a I had a situation recently with a couple, and I wish I could remember the exact topic, but someone came in with harsh startup and they were just totally wrong about they didn't know X, Y. Well, I didn't know. I'm like, if you didn't know, then why did you start with full attack when you didn't even know where they were? Maybe they were running late and they don't know why, right? They jump in. It's an example of it. Your partner arrives late and immediately you're jumping in and you haven't even let them tell you why they were running late. You have no idea. So that sort of scenario is a really destructive pattern in relationships. And so it's definitely it's pretty easy to identify. It will often happen, in the room in front of you. And when it does, you don't want to miss that one because that's a real important habit. And that's something I tell my clients. It's like, whether or not you end up staying in this relationship, this is a behavior you need to stop doing because it will destroy any relationship that you have. And I think that's one of the things when I'm working with couples, and oftentimes they come in where they're like, I don't know if I'm going to stay or not. And I'm like, well, at the very least, let's learn how to have a healthy relationship. And people are doing things like not accepting influence, harsh startup. You want, doing stonewalling, criticism, those sorts of things. You want to teach them how not to do that because there's no relationship, right, that's going to withstand that level of negativity. And I think in today's world, I've been doing this for the last 30 years of my career, 30 plus years. I've been a couples therapist. And I will say in the last decade, as our society has gotten increasingly hostile through social media and with how public discourse has gone down, I'm seeing couples talking to each other, having a lot less empathy, care, and being very harsh, with each other in their relationships. And I think it's just kind of this whole societal lowering of the bar and the standards how we communicate with each other, even at home, not just, snarky comments, in social media. We're seeing it at home. And so I think it's so important to teach my clients. And I have some clients where I've never had to say it so harsh as I have in the last, 5, 10 years. Is like, this isn't going to work with anyone. This isn't your wife being or your husband being too sensitive. Harsh startup is just never good. It's not good with your kids. It's not good at work. It's not good with your partner. You shouldn't be doing this. This is not okay. It's not okay way to express your frustration with another human. It ruins relationships. So I've gotten pretty direct because I think, society doesn't role model a lot of good behaviors. And then there's something called the distance and isolation cascade. And this is an interesting one. And if you're new to this working with couples, this is a real important thing to be aware of, is that when couples are actually heading for divorce, oftentimes there is this cascade of distance and isolation that doesn't have a lot of conflict. And right now, I'm working with a couple who I think is in this phase, and they're thinking they're doing a little bit better because they're fighting less. Well, they're fighting less because one of them is what Sue Johnson would call a burned out pursuer, where she's just stopped pursuing. And so that is also in Sue Johnson's work. She calls it something totally different, which is why we need this unifying framework. Um, but sometimes what you're going to see is that there's distance, isolation, and less conflict, but it's because one person stopped trying. Their heart's been hurt so much that they have stopped trying. And so it's more emotional disengagement. And so the conflict is less obvious. And yet they're actually closer to divorce than when they were, having these knockdown, drag out fights, yelling at each other, not physical, but these verbal fights, right? These so that's something to be aware of. Just because they're not fighting or they're fighting less with couples, it could actually be the beginning of the end, not that, oh, things are getting better. There, you really have to rebuild that emotional trust for couples. Okay, typologies of happy marriages. So, volatile couples. So, these couples are very emotional and they have very passionate conflict and affection. And so, these couples have the high highs and the low lows. And so, they can have nasty fights and they have the great makeup sex and then they go back and forth. I tend to think of this as like younger couples, like in their, you see this pattern. You don't see this pattern as much. At least I have not in my career. I tend to see this more in my younger couples as they're learning to, share and be in a relationship. But these are the more volatile couples, sometimes passionate. Then you have the validating couples where they have moderate emotional expressiveness and a strong friendship. And so this is more what I would say that most therapy approaches try to have couples, have this validating couple. It's more the model we tend to promote in couples therapy. And then you have what they call conflict avoiding couples, where there's minimal emotional expression, but they emphasize marital strengths and solidarity. So these are people who are staying together. So all of three of these can have couples that stay together for 25 plus years happily, and the key is they're keeping that 20 to 1 ratio positivity most of the time, 5 to 1 during conflict, but they have very different styles. So you can be very emotional, moderate, or low emotional expression. Um, but there are pluses and minuses with each one of these. Okay, so let's look at what Gottman calls the sound relationship house theory. So there are two critical components. The one is that positive affect overall. So having that, ratio of positive affect 20 to 1 for couples. And then the second component is helping couples develop effective negative affect reduction during conflicts. So you want to really pump up 21 ratio, positive, positive affect interactions for every negative one. And then you want the couple to really develop the ability to reduce negative affect, especially during conflict, is really critical. So let's look at the 8 key areas. The first is what he calls love maps, which is understanding your partner's inner world. So love maps mean how your partner likes their coffee. You know who they're really close to, who they're not. You know what they're afraid of. You know what they enjoy. This is understanding your partner and their inner world. If you're familiar with my unifying framework, I talk a lot about getting into someone's holodeck, which is kind of their meaning making system. And so the love map is kind of similar to that, in that you understand how they make sense of life. You understand how they interpret the world and what's important to them and what's not. The second one is fondness and admiration. So that's your ability to express respect and affection for your partner and making sure that there is a lot of this. And this is a funny one because oftentimes when I bring this up, a lot of couples are able to add that in. It's like it just kind of slips away, especially once kids come, right? They forget this piece. Um, so, a much tougher one to achieve is turning towards your partner versus turning away. And what this means is when you are hurt, right? When you are angry, when there is conflict, when there is disappointment, when there is tension in the relationship, rather than turn away and just take care of your emotions yourself or talk to a friend or, focus on some kind of obsessive behavior you have, you turn towards your partner and you engage them to work it through together. So turning towards someone, not in an attacking way, but turning towards leaning into the relationship rather than leaning out when difficulty comes. Now, this is a telltale sign for me when I'm working with couples as to whether or not things are moving in the right direction. So there was something he calls positive sentiment override, and simply translated is giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. And I talk about this a lot with my couples, and it really resonates because, when you first meet someone, you normally have this you fall in love and you've got the oxytocin, you got the whole chemistry. And so when you're falling in love, neutral and positive things, and even slightly negative things are interpreted through a very positive lens, right? It's the butterflies and roses and your partner's just perfect, glowing, angelic, magical, right? So that's positive sentiment override, which is even neutral, certainly neutral and even slightly negative things can be interpreted in a positive way. What happens is over time, if there isn't good conflict management, you end up with negative sentiment override. And in that case, that's usually when they end up in our office, neutral things or even positive things get interpreted negatively. And so I talk a lot about this with my clients, and it's one of the couples I look for with couples is to see, can we get them back to positive sentiment override? And that often means doing 30 to 1 ratio of positive to ones, right? Now, so this is where you're trying to get them back to not necessarily butterflies, roses, and la la land, the euphoria of falling in love, but to where when your partner does something neutral, you give them the benefit of the doubt, you listen to what they have to say. Um, and you don't jump automatically to the worst possible negative interpretation of what that might have meant, okay? And you all know couples can argue about anything, right? Toothpaste, trash, the wrong tone. It's like, and some couples just whew, they're off to the races when you have the negative sentiment override over the little, even positive things. There, you can certainly get to a point in a relationship where no matter what you say, it could trigger your partner who interprets it in a negative way. So that's really a difficult place to be. So let's continue with these key concepts. Number 5 is problem solving. So you want to be able to solve solvable problems effectively. And being able to dialogue constructively on perpetual problems. So Gottman's research identified this is another great statistic. 69% of what couples argue about are the same basic personality differences for across the relationships. Only like 31% of what couples argue about is solvable. Okay. So, and I tell my couples this 30% of what comes up, you're going to actually be able to solve, resolve. It's not going to come back. 69% or almost 70% of what you argue about is going to be the same personality differences. One of you is super social, one of you is not. One of you is super organized, one of you is not. One of you, likes to spend money on lavish trips. The other likes to save in huge amounts, right? Each one, these are very different. Types of issues and ways of these are personality differences, preferences, beliefs, values there's some differences there. And so they're having to constantly navigate this as they try to navigate life together. So getting good at solving both the solvable problems as well as getting into what he calls constructive dialogue around perpetual problems. And so those perpetual problems, if you get into what gridlock, so couples who end up not staying together get into gridlocks. It's like, here we go again. You're this and I'm that, and they get whacked. They bash their heads and they get into gridlock and they get into their little fighting positions and they have the same argument over and over and over again for the love of God. Okay, you can't tell that I've worked a lot with couples. It always stuns me. Like, so it sometimes I'm like, you were expecting something different this time, really? Um, so what you do with this is, I and sometimes have to do some education here. It's like you two are always different, right? Let's say she's the social butterfly. She's always going to want to spend 20 to 30 minutes saying goodbye to people at parties. She's always going to want to be out Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He is going to want to be able to say goodbye in less than 2 minutes flat. He's always going to want to go out no more than one, night a week, whatever. And that's the different. You two are different. It's probably somewhat attracted you to each other. And so how do you have constructive dialogue? Keep coming back to the table looking for different compromises or different middle grounds or different solutions. So the couples who make it, when you got a social butterfly and a homebody, that rather than like, you're so fill in the blank, criticizing, stonewalling, doing all of that, they're like, here we are again. You're wanting all the social time, and I need my time in my recliner, with my book. How do we handle this one? How do we make it work better this time based on what we've learned in the past? So there's this willingness to come and compromise for 50 plus years on the same topic. Okay. That's what makes a marriage work long term. And so helping people realize that, and that is something, this is definitely an area where I see a lot of couples struggling, just a willingness to compromise. I think a lot of people have moved in, and I think the internet and social media have moved people to a very like, my needs, my feelings, my, and this willingness to compromise on that can be difficult. And so, but then having a conversation about that with couples is important. But realizing These are the most important because this is what you're going to argue about 70% of the time, right? You need to know how to come to those conversations and not have it be a battle. It needs to be how does it a very constructive dialogue. Then there's physiological soothing. The ability to calm yourself and your partner down during conflict is particularly important. And Gottman's research, indicates that men physiologically take longer to calm down than women do. So, and some of his research looked at how women who are good at this, their marriages, are stable, but knowing that it takes about men, I believe, an hour was the average, of what they may need once they get really angry. Is why structured timeouts are typically an hour. I love this one, making the dreams come true. So even when you have very different positions, let's say on saving, on what to do with money, right? One person is, I work really hard all year long. I need to have a week or two of a lavish vacation to make all those 60-hour, 70-hour weeks worth it. The other person's like, oh my God, I came from a family, didn't have enough money, and I need to have a lot of money in the bank to feel safe, right? And so you want to get to the reason underneath it, right? So I need this, I have this emotional safety when I feel like I have the financial safety net. For the other person, it's like, it helps me get through these really tough weeks. So the dream within each person's position and trying to understand that. And so when my couples get into gridlock, I really have them look at, what are you trying to achieve? What is the dream within this position? What does it mean to go on this vacation? What does it mean to have a certain amount of money in the bank, right? And to have them talk about those dreams, it normally softens people and can often make the problem more easily solvable, find better solutions when you do that. And then creating shared meaning. So developing a marital culture where there are rituals or goals or traditions that you do together. This is really important for families, for couples. And so I really encourage my couples and families to really have a clear set of these traditions. So the importance of trust, as I mentioned earlier in 2011, Gottman revised his model to highlight trust, which he defined as action-oriented dependability during conflict. Again, his focus is on that conflict. And it's a key factor preventing the nasty, nasty conflict loops. When there is this sense of trust, which kind of goes to the positive, sentiment override, you trust that your partner does care for you. And it really promotes that emotional attunement and effective repair for couples. So cultivating and helping couples trust one another. You do this by infusing a lot of the positive, the 21, sometimes it's 30, 40 to 1 to rebuild trust, right? Having them put into words and actions that their care for one another and to really be able to cultivate that. And I always tell my couples, I'm like, trust is very, very fragile. It is like the thinnest crystal vase you can imagine, and it doesn't take much to damage it. And you really, really want to treat this not cavalier. Trust is a hard thing to cultivate. It's a very difficult thing to repair once it's been shattered. Okay, so let's look at some of the interventions. So the basic format starts with a catch-up. So they discuss whatever recent marital events, homework, and issues with each other, how they went. They turn and talk to each other. There's a pre-intervention interaction called the boxing round, where they discuss a difficult topic for 6 to 10 minutes. And then there's a collaborative intervention where the therapist encourages couples to generate their own solutions, and they discuss their own ideas for how to improve things. So you're kind of having the couple come up with some ideas of how to make that better. Continuing, then you address any resistance if it arises, like I shouldn't have to, you'll get resistance, trust me. Um, shouldn't I be able to just express my feelings any way I want to? I'm like, no. Let's find a better. Research does not support that. And then you have them do another practice interaction with the new strategies, another 6 minute interaction, and then you develop homework based on this. So it's kind of a formula for the basic session. You have them talk about a difficult topic, you have them come up with a solution, you refine it, and then you have them practice those in skills. So very action oriented in session is how the typical session will go. So let's look at some specific interventions around love maps. You got couples improving mutual understanding by addressing, who their friends are, potential friends are, their rivals, competitors, enemies, knowing who those people are, any recent and upcoming significant events in their life, as well as current stresses, worries, hopes, and aspirations. So you want to know what the internal world of your partner is like. They do a lot of work around softening harsh startup. So you want to have soft startup. You want to start with positivity. I really appreciate how you um, complain without blaming. So as a interesting, I remember the first time I heard Gottman talk about this, I found it really interesting. You want to be able to complain about your part. You can complain about a behavior, but you want to do that without blaming. When did X. I so you're going to be focusing on specific incidents, not personality. When you came down and you just kind of assumed that I hadn't whatever taken care of the kids, fill in the blank. That hurt my feelings, and so you're going to be very specific, not saying, you're so judgmental or you assume the worst or whatever it might be. So you want to try to describe the situation without judgment as much as possible. And you want to be as concise and specific when you're talking about what's upsetting you, rather than getting into these broad statements about you and whatever. And again, he does say use I statements, but that's not the only intervention, as you know from earlier. But you want to ask for specific behavioral changes. And often what I tell my couples where there's a lot of conflict is just ask for what you want. Do you really need to go into painful detail about what you don't want and why what they just did was so upsetting? It's like, just ask for what you want. So it could be, if you need me to making a doctor's appointment, in the future, could you possibly do X, right? Or whatever it might be. Okay, now, yeah, if you just recently had a little stress over scheduling a doctor's appointment for your partner, there may be an embedded, criticism in there that they might be hearing. Fair enough, fair enough. But you know what? You're just going to ask for what you want. And if they want to go back and rehash why you're asking for it, you want to keep that as soft and as gentle as humanly possible. Um, so ask for what you want. Don't need to go into a whole lot of detail about what you don't want and every time, right? If you can get what you want without, doing a rehashing a bad incident, just ask for what you want. And if that works, just start there. And if you need to go back and revisit the past, fine. But just try for asking what you want and not saying what you don't want. Like, just try that. It generally works pretty well. And just remaining polite and appreciative of your partner, knowing that they always have a different valid perspective than your own. And expressing vulnerability rather than blaming emotion. So always, talking more rather than anger at your partner, talking about, even if you felt hurt or misunderstood, but trying to share emotions in a way that's not going to feel like it's blaming to your partner. Okay. So, for those of you who need to go, I see we're on the hour, and if you need your letter of attendance, it is now available in the chat, and I will continue wrapping this up, and I will take questions at the end. Okay. So the dream within conflict. I love this one. This is really one of my favorites. This is used to help resolve those perpetual problems. We kind of described it above because it is one of my favorite Gottman interventions. But you want to, when a client has, when partners have different positions, you really want to understand why, right? Like, this is why I need that lavish vacation. This is why I need the big, savings accounts. You want to know what the dream is underneath that, what they're hoping to achieve, who they, how they see themselves, the world, their life, a sense of safety, a sense of meaning. But you're looking for the meaning and the deeper purpose in their life behind a given position, whether um, around whatever the issue is. And so, what their feelings, their beliefs, really getting down to kind of some core issues around freedom or hope or purpose. And then you say, so how do we, with the vacation analogy, example, because I've had this come up with many couples. I use it a lot. The person who needs to go on that vacation to feel like it is a reward for really hard work that they do, and the person who needs the money in the bank account to feel safe. So how do we maximize partner A's need for financial security with partner B's need for having a big rewarding kind of vacation? How do we give each of you most of what, as much as we can of your position. So I tell my couples, I don't want let's try not to focus on call it compromise. Let's figure out how we can give both people maximum amount of what they want, what they're looking for. And using this dream within often it results in couples being able to find new solutions, middle grounds, possibilities that they weren't able to see when they were just arguing about, how we're going to spend this $20,000 or whatever it might be. So, and then we have negotiating marital power. So definitely looking at discussion of gender roles. They use checklists to address that. There's no prescribed division of labor, and the couples kind of define what is fair and equitable, what they believe is fair and equitable, but improving mutual respect for and appreciation for each person's role and contributions. And so this can be really important with especially heterosexual couples when kids come along. Usually, the research is very, very clear that women are still doing most of the emotional as well as physical labor in terms of taking care of children. And so having this conversation is really important in today's world, especially with heterosexual couples where, especially both of them are working, right? It really is a big issue that destroys a lot of marriages, is what I see. And if you want to see gender role, what equality looks like, if when you work with same-sex couples, because they don't have the societal narratives around who does what, you can see a real co-parenting relationship, quite frankly, in a way I rarely have seen in any heterosexual couple I've ever worked with. So I hope you all get the joy of working with a same-sex couple with children, to get just a totally different sense of what that can look like. 'Cause it's definitely something that is still a huge issue in our society. And because we raise children in such a labor-intensive way in our society right now, at least here in the United States, it is very labor intensive. It is not couple friendly, it is not parent friendly. And when the woman's having to take on the huge portion of that burden, she often burns out and the relationship becomes very imbalanced and unhealthy, and it often will unravel. And oftentimes, to be honest, here is why this is so important. Oftentimes, the guy just doesn't get it. Understanding that just going shopping for the stroller and the car seat and the picking the kids up and helping with even elementary school homework. It doesn't look like much from the outside. It really doesn't. And but to realize how much of a burden that is, and it's really the interruption, right? Especially if you have a working mother or a career mother, like all of the interruptions to your thought process, let alone getting up in the middle of the night for the first, several years constantly. There's a lot there. And so having these conversations is really important. So, Gottman approach is definitely one of the leading cognitive behavioral couples therapy approaches. It is definitely research informed. It's not evidence-based. It's on evidence-based treatment, but it is research informed, and it's got a lot of great information and research behind it that I think is really helpful, very motivating to a lot of couples to get them to change some of their behaviors. Great psychoeducation material. I draw a lot from the stats. I highlighted many of them here today, and they have a lot of great books for your clients. So and great exercises that we have as well. So I'm going to go ahead and see if there are any. If you have any questions, if you're attending live and listening to this attending live, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. Um, okay, but it looks like people are pretty good here with any. But if you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Sounds like people are agreeing and liking what they're having to say here. Oh, here we go. Oh, I do have some questions here. So could I provide some examples of it's 20 to 1, 30 to 1. Does it end up feeling like the session becomes focused on so many positives that it feels fake? Oh, to be clear, Olivia, in session, it's no, the 20 to 1 ratio isn't so much about what's going on in session. The 20 to 1 ratio is much more about what they're doing at home. And so, how do you measure that, right? So with the 20 to 1 ratio, I use it as a psychoeducation soundbite that usually people get intuitively. That's what I like. I think Gottman psychoed, what I like about it is most of it, except for positive sentiment override. There are a few of them. Negative affect, the repressivity. They most of them are really fun and easy to use, four horsemen, but and the 20 to 1 ratio. So you're encouraging them to do that outside of session. In session, no, it's probably not gonna, if you watch the video, it may not be 20 to 1 of the actual therapy session because they're coming in here to have difficult conversations. So that's exactly what they say. So it wouldn't be so much in session. You don't want to be Pollyanna, but you do want to encourage them to go out of their way to have small, seemingly minor, positive interactions with each other. A little hug and kiss when you walk in the door. It's huge, actually. It's not, um, just even touching, caressing their back when you walk by each other in the kitchen or whatever it might be. Those little things are worth a lot. I remember, I don't have the stats in front of me, but some of his early research, I remember reading something along the lines of like couples who stay together, because he actually had something called a love lab where he'd literally put them in condos and have video cameras. I don't know all of what they got, but I do know that he said that the couples who stayed together versus those who didn't, those who were distressed versus those who weren't, there was something like 90 seconds, 2 minutes of physical touch more than those who didn't stay together. It is little. So I use it with my couples. I'm like, I'm not asking for more than 2 minutes here. But each one of those little caresses that takes 3 seconds is huge. Okay. They are huge. The kiss, the hug, the caress on the back. So I use the 20 to 1 ratio to say that stuff matters and you really need to be focusing on it. And you need to do a lot of it because you let it slip. So that's how I use it, Olivia. I hope that's helpful. Uh, Yeah, Erica is saying here, what's interesting to me is when couples portray being happy, which especially on social media, you get that because they're always on these trips, they look so lovely, and then you find out that they're gonna they're getting a divorce and can't stand each other. Yeah, it's sadly very common. Okay, I got a lot of more things here. The slides are at this point in time are not available, but coming in the fall, I'm working on getting a way to get them to you. So that's kind of the goal in the fall that there would be something like that. So, okay, I got a question here. Okay, so this is a great question. Sabani is asking, what is the fundamental difference between the way EFT approaches couple sessions versus Gottman? I love that question. Um, and so, and that they're not trying, oh, is as they're not trying to help couples find their patterns and just do psychoeducation on communication. So I think Gottman is talking about, he is focusing on coaching. Um, Clients to learn how to have effective conflict, right? For lack of a better word, to actually, um, be able to have difficult conversations well. Where Sue Johnson, she's trying to repair the secure attachment for the couple. And by repairing the secure attachment, hopefully creating and shifting that negative interaction pattern so it's healthier. So Gottman's and his approach is much more psychoeducation, directive. He's having them talk to each other in session, and he's kind of more of a consultant or a coach, where the therapist is a consultant or a coach. Where Sue Johnson, she's much more orchestrating the interactions and getting down to much more primal attachment emotions. Sue Johnson's work is much more emotionally intense, I would say, than Gottman is much more like, let's get the two of you communicating better. And so it is different. And when Gottman says it should be primarily positive affect, I think he's kind of comparing it to Sue Johnson. It's much more intense and heavy. Okay, this should be available on YouTube in the next week or so. So what are your thoughts on what is gained from level 1 versus 2 Gottman and taking the next step and getting certified? You know, eh, I have gravitated. I mean, I use Gottman's. I'm not certified in Gottman's approaches. I have taken some of the EFT trainings. I have a ton of training in marriage family therapy as well. It's my doctorate's in that area. I've done a lot of training in systemic as well as postmodern approaches. So I think it's funny. I think with couples therapy and a lot of us end up coming up with our own little approach. So if you feel like you get a lot out of those trainings, then go and do it, right? A lot of folks would tell me that they didn't. I had live supervision learning how to work with couples for 4 years, 50 weeks out of the year. So I got tons of live training. If you don't feel like you've got that live training, you're not comfortable with couples, I would say take, Gottman or integrated behavioral couples therapy or EFT trainings so that you get comfortable working with couples. Couples are tough, man. Couples are very tough. So I would say find one of the approaches that resonates with you because EFT is not for every couple or every therapist. Maybe the Gottman's more your style. Find one and just take enough so that you get good at using it. But as you could hear from today, there's a lot of overlap across these different theories. That's why I have my unifying framework, um, because there is definite overlap as to what we are looking for. Okay. Okay. Very good. I'm trying to answer all these questions. Awesome. I am glad. Okay, sounds like everyone's got their questions and they're enjoying the free webinars. So yeah, Erica's asking, do I ever have courses for certificate? Yes, I absolutely do. I have the Therapy That Works Unifying Framework, where I do have a whole module on couples where I synthesize Gottman and EFT and IBCT. Um, and so I'm developing, my certificate courses on how to do therapy is the Therapy That Works Unifying Framework. It is a master class. It's 45 hours. It goes over 5 months. The next cohort will start in September, goes through January. And so I definitely do that. And then I am starting in the fall as well an advanced clinician series. So that is for people who have gone through some level of training, whether it's like EFT or even IFS or my Therapy That Works Unifying Framework, and who's gone through and learned one theory well, and then once kind of we're going to be working with a mixed reality simulated client for 4 sessions together around special topics. So we're going to start off with trauma informed treatment with an individual in the fall. So you can keep a lookout for that because I'm real excited to launch that course. I just had so many people asking to do more simulation and to do more than just the first session. They wanted to work through a whole case. So we'll be working kind of like live supervision with the team. Um, so that'll be really fun. Very cool. How is the how is the it's a clinical advanced training, it's immersive training in psychotherapy, something like that. And so there will be, and so next spring, I am planning on doing conflictual couples next spring. If you're interested in learning how to work with couples, we will be doing, in the fall, I will probably always be working with an individual. We're going to start with trauma-informed treatment in the fall. We'll do couples. We'll do probably some narcissism. We'll do some affairs, working with couples around affairs. So in the spring cohorts will be couple family-based vignettes or clients, and then in the fall we'll have individual clients that we work with as a team using mixed reality simulation. So that will be okay. Erica was asking, yeah, for simulation. So that's yeah. So and if you're on my mailing list, oh, is it today? I think today I sent out an email asking for your opinion as I designed the course. So I have a basic plan and outline, but I will be creating this advanced clinical seminar, kind of live supervision, working with clients and learning real skills around different topics. And they'll change every fall versus spring. So my little institute has semesters, even though I'm not a university. You can't take. I was in the school system for over 50 years, so my whole life is still works on semesters. Awesome. Great. So yeah, the course, the web page isn't up yet. I'm working on it. I don't think I have it available to the public yet, but if you're on my mailing list, you'll be hearing about it in August. So, and there'll be an early bird registration to kick it off. Actually, you know what? I actually think I'm doing that next week. I take that back. So at least anyway, you'll be getting emails about when things come available. So, okay. Awesome, awesome. Any other questions? I think we're doing good here. Um, yes, yeah. Working with couples, I think, is the hardest thing there is. I'm reading some of the comments. And so learning how to do therapy with them. It's beautiful if you haven't done simulation, you can actually pause the client, send them away, and you and I are kind of like co-therapists and we figure out what to do next. But boy, with couples, things move fast. And I even wish in my own sessions I could put my own clients on pause. Can we just pause and let me think about how to handle this? So it's really fun if you've not done simulation training. It's really awesome. So we'll be doing that'll be available to anyone who's gone through at least one kind of advanced course. And I just sent out a survey, I think, today to ask people about, their thoughts on that. But that is certainly something coming up. And otherwise, I do have the Unifying Framework Level 1 course. It is like everything I think clinicians need to know. It works for couples. You're going to use the same approach for individuals, couples, and families, and it works with around a lot of the concepts we talked about in today's thing. Awesome. Yeah, someone's saying that they reference Gottman often when they work with the couples in internship. Yeah, during their master's program. Yep. Oh, the cost for the courses. I will be putting that out as we send it out. I do every course I have has a 12-month payment, or not every course. Every large course that I have has a 12-month payment. The early bird specials are definitely the best way. You do get a really good discount with those early bird discounts. So that someone's asking, how long did it take you to feel comfortable working with couples? Oh, wow. Honest to God, they're the only clients that still kind of make me tired at the end of the session. But I mean, I had live supervision. And so I think that's one of the things I think that has happened is that fewer and fewer people get quality live supervision. I had someone sitting behind a mirror watching me do therapy for, 50 weeks out of the year. I was watching someone else for, whatever. We had 200 hours of live supervision for 4 years. So I had 800 hours of live supervision at least. And most people don't even get like, I don't know, 10 or 20, maybe 50 hours in a co-empty program. And it's all with video and you're getting these tiny little clips. They're not whole sessions. And and so it really depends on the type of supervision you get, whether or not you're comfortable. And that's why when someone asks how many levels of the Gottman training do I need, I'm like, well, enough so that you feel pretty comfortable working with a couple. And it just depends on a lot of your other training experiences. But what I'm seeing, as someone who's been in the field for 30 years, is that there's less and less really high quality training. So much as supervision has become, are you hitting your target numbers? And we're managing crisis suicide, and that sucks up all the supervision time. And there's often not a lot of time left to really talk about how do you manage, a couple and do the nuance of the work. And you aren't having people watch you and give you feedback. But couples work is tough. And it can take definitely years before you feel comfortable working with couples because they can be highly volatile. And for me, because I started out doing therapy when I was pretty young, I was 22, 23 when I saw my first client. And it was hard for me to feel confident enough to actually step in and manage, couples as they escalate. So now that I'm older, I am 55, if you wonder, that now I have no problem stopping. I have no fear. So a lot of it also comes down to, are you willing to step in and intervene so that they don't escalate too high? I don't subscribe to a theory. Well, I want to see what they do. I'm like, no, because then we spend the rest of the session getting them to like just calm down enough to take in anything that we're talking about. So I am not a proponent of letting them argue unsupervised. I supervise it and I will stop when they start getting really nasty and escalating. I don't let that happen. And that took me some time to have the confidence to actually step in and say, no, we need to stop this conversation. And you have to do it pretty forcefully because they're angry, right? So, and couples therapy is much more difficult if you have a high conflict couple to do online. It's the only time I've actually kicked someone, said, I cannot see you on Zoom, was a high conflict couple where there were, danger, there was potential for violence. And then I will not do that because you can't control them in the same way you can when you're in the room. Control is just not the right word. You cannot manage the conflict. You can't control anyone. If you haven't learned that yet, I'm here to share your bad news with you. You can't control anyone, but you can manage conflict much better because you can feel it coming before you see it on their face. So, okay, everyone, wait, I got a couple more questions coming in this thing here. Oh, special books for clients. You know what? I still just recommend the Seven Principles that Make a Marriage Work. It's one of his older books. I still recommend that one. That is my favorite one to recommend. Um, okay. Oh, someone's asking about I had an early bird special it's funny. Well, it was supposed to have ended, but I have not had the time to go back and pull. the coupon off. So I will give that to you because I will probably be pretty busy until Monday. But I do, if you are building a private practice, you want to write a book or do anything along those lines, I do have an early bird special. Um, if you're interested, that is, let me get back over here. That is for, I'll put it in the chat. This is the early bird special. So this is a mastermind for building a private practice, writing a book, launching a podcast or an online course. But you want to create something that's got, needs some marketing, needs a business plan, but you want to expand the streams of income. And especially, I think, in today's climate, knowing, I think, as clinicians, we have the ability, which we didn't have 10 years ago, any one of us, even if you don't even have your license yet, you have the capacity to create multiple streams of income. And I have a course that really focuses more on creating content like books and online courses. But this course is both for private practice building as well as content creation. And where everyone struggles is marketing, but also just sticking to your goals because we're also overwhelmed. And so the Beyond the Hour Mastermind course is about having a small group of other mental health professionals who are building some kind of business practice. It could be building a private practice, expanding it, going from insurance to cash base, or maybe your goal is just to start one on the side, or maybe you want to write a book or start a social media channel or do online courses. So this is kind of a mastermind with other like-minded professionals. And I've done this for the last 2, 3 years. And what we've really discovered so far is that because we had platforms where you can share and get feedback, and no one did any of that. They're like, I just need a date where I got to get my homework in. I'm going to show up, and I know all my friends in the class are going to have their work done too, and I don't want to show up empty-handed. And that's how I make progress in building my business or writing my book or creating my online content. And and it's open because what we discovered is that you can start one project and then end up with a different one. I literally this is not an exaggeration, I had one woman who was working on this online course for, I don't know, 6 months. And then she disappeared for 2 or 3 months and she came back. She's like, Diane, I'm publishing my book next week. I'm like, oh my God. So she goes, I just gave up on the online course and I turned it into a book. And that's the thing in the 21st century is that there's a core set of skills that you need, whether you're building a private practice, writing a book, doing, YouTube, social media channels, a podcast, all of them, in the 21st century, there's just this core set of skills. And once you know one, you can move them in different, apply them in lots of different ways. So that is the Beyond the Hour Mastermind. And so I just put the link there if you're interested. I welcome you to join it. The early bird special technically ended yesterday, but I have been back to back with meetings, and my kids are having their first day of summer. So, and they had a bunch of doctor's appointments, and I have back-to-back clients tomorrow. So we're looking at Monday because I teach all weekend too. So before we takes more work to take it down. So anyway, so I'm keeping it up because I've had some people say I'm traveling. Can I do it over the weekend? So it'll be up over the weekend. Okay, very good. So this is my last June one. Starting in July, I take the month off from these free trainings, but starting up in the fall, I'm going to start a whole new series related to traditional counseling theories that go along with my counseling theory textbook. So we'll go over psychodynamic, Adlerian, Jungian, Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, Gestalt, but we'll also do dialectic behavior therapy, trauma-focused CBT. So yeah, Jack likes Jung. Excellent. I'll tell you this. It was very fascinating, Jack. When I first wrote my counseling textbooks, you get 20 different professors to give you feedback, right? And as we were collecting the feedback, it was neck and neck. There were 10 professors who said, I don't know and I don't know why we got these. Did we ask this question? I can't remember. 10 professors said, if you put keep Jung in the textbook, I will not use it because I don't believe Jung, should be taught in a textbook. We had another 10 people. If you keep Jung, in the textbook, I will adopt the book because of Jung. I looked at my editor. I'm like, what do I do? It is so crazy. I was just like, What? This is like just part of the history of the field. Like it's an introductory to counseling theory. I'm not saying you must practice Jung, but like you should be able to talk intelligently about Jung. But boy, people have strong, that was in the counseling theory word. That was like, woo, wow, we've got a can of worms right there. Oh, there you go, Jack. So yeah, you're one of the 10 who were pro, but it was 50-50 split. So awesome. Awesome, awesome. I am so glad that you're enjoying Ethan studying. So yes, with yeah, these materials, we try to make it accessible. I do try to make it accessible because these ideas are so precious and important, and I think we're so lucky to get to study what we study. Um, so yeah, so yes, I am off to Kenya if you can believe it. So if you're on my mailing list, you probably saw a picture of my the baby elephant orphanage. I'm going to go visit. So you'll be hearing a little bit about, we're going to try to adopt some elephants in Kenya. Well, I've already adopted some. I'm going with some of the students from United States International University of Nairobi, and we're going to go visit the baby elephants who have this incredible social structure. I mean, they really are these I've been studying animals. When I go on vacation to a place that's kind of new, I like to learn something. And so I'm learning a lot about elephants and lions and all the good stuff. So, but elephants truly are remarkable creatures. Um, yes, yes, yeah. Erica saw the baby elephant pictures. Like I said in my email, I recommend you can go to the Sheldrick Animal Wildlife Trust in Nairobi, or just Google baby elephant or orphanage in Nairobi. It's the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. It's been wild though. I've met all these people who are like, yeah, I go to that because they have all these cute little like 3-minute videos of rescuing a baby elephant, and nursing them back to health. It's so cute. So it's $50 to help feed one of those little guys. So I'm really excited about that. So anyway, I'll share a little bit of my adventure, and I hope to create my goal is to, if we can get permission, to create a little video, 5 things humans could learn from elephants about healthy relationships, since they really do have very positive social networks. Um, so yeah, awesome. I love it. Some people. Oh yeah, Sanya, you're in Africa. That's right. Very good. Awesome. Okay, Denise is saying she just started Laugh Your Way to Licensure. Woohoo! Those of you who are going for an MFT license, we have fun there. Awesome. You got your master's at Shamad in Honolulu. Aloha. Awesome, awesome. You got this. Ghana. Sorry, Senna. I got it wrong. West Africa. I'm sorry. Sorry, I got you mixed up with some other folks I was talking with earlier this week, I guess. So awesome, but so great to have you here. And Denise, congratulations. Laugh Your Way to Licensure. We get people licensed and we have a good time doing it. Okay, everyone, this was so much fun. I will see you all back in August, and we will start up with the traditional counseling theories, including Jung. Okay, take care and be well. Bye-bye.